And so one of my most important jobs tonight is just to acknowledge that Hobsons Bay is the land of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the land and also the waterways of this special place where we live. And I want to acknowledge their really significant and ongoing role in protecting this special place and all its plants and creatures. And in the context of a climate emergency, it's just so exciting for us that you're here ready to step up and do your part to putting back some of the habitat that has been lost over the last 100 years. So thank you so much for being here. And we're really excited to work with you on this program and to help connect you to the experts that you need to help and give you a bit of motivation, hopefully, and a bunch of free plants to get it all started. So we're really looking forward to having you on this program. And thanks once again for signing up. A couple of other things I need to say about the session, just to give you a layout of what we'll do tonight. We're going to hear from Hannah in a minute, just about why this program is so important for Hobsons Bay and how it connects strategically to the work that we're doing. We're then going to hear from Kiara, who is just about the most inspiring example of a local habitat garden that I've come across. I know you're going to love to listen to her and how her garden has been transformed. Then we'll have a quick break. And then we'll meet Santia, who's going to help you go through the landscape design process. Don't be intimidated by that, but it will just be like a common sense process of working out microclimates on your site and choosing plants to match. And then we'll just do a bit of a cap off with some housekeeping. And I think the other things I need to let you know are that we are recording tonight's session for anyone who couldn't make it. And just for privacy reasons, if you don't want to appear in that video, then turn your video off. Otherwise, if you ask a question verbally, you may appear in it. And I also want to let you know that you can change the name that appears publicly by going to the participants window, clicking on your name, the More button, and then clicking rename if that's relevant to you. We'll mute your mics unless you're intending to speak. And at any point tonight, if you want to ask questions, use the chat window down the bottom to do that. And we can either answer it in the middle of the session or we've got some scheduled question time. And if there's anything that's left over at the end, then our presenters have been really kind in saying they can stay a bit longer to make sure we don't lose any. So that's the housekeeping tonight. I'm going to hand you over to Hannah briefly. Thanks, Hannah.
Hello everyone, I'm Hannah, the Biodiversity Officer at Hobsons Bay, and I'd just like to welcome you all to this Habitat Gardens in Hobsons Bay program. It is our second program of this financial year, and it's something that we're really excited about developing and I suppose producing to the community in Hobsons Bay. So habitat gardens are important for increasing local biodiversity as they create corridors or links for wildlife to move safely across the municipality. By incorporating our local Indigenous plants into our gardens, we attract our native wildlife. So you attract bird life, reptiles, amphibians, and insects, things like that. Indigenous plants are already suited to our local environment, and they work well in residential gardens because they're already adapted to our climatic conditions, but also our soil conditions. They provide habitat, food, and shelter for wildlife, but they also develop those safe stepping stones for wildlife in a highly urbanised environment. The Habitat Gardens program has stemmed from a community submission, which is Picture Idea, and it has been developed to encourage and promote residents to use local Indigenous plants in their private gardens to create that broader ecosystem connectivity with our conservation reserves. The initiative aims to establish that greater genetic diversity, establishing habitats for wildlife, food sources, but also stepping stones to reduce the risk of biodiversity loss and species loss. You could be at any stage of your habitat garden. Kiara's been developing her garden for almost 20 years. Some people are just starting out, so it doesn't matter what stage you're at. The important thing here is to remember that by bringing native plants into your gardens, we're increasing the local biodiversity, but you're also providing habitat for native wildlife, and you're attracting that wildlife into your gardens. So tonight, our first presenter is Kiara Perry, and by trade, she's a qualified dog trainer, and I've seen she's just got a little logo on her top as well. But she also provides behavioural consultations for dogs with anxiety and aggression. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
But she's also one of the most passionate habitat gardeners I've met. So in 2003, she started her journey to develop a habitat garden. She started small, but it has constantly evolved. and it's always changing. And I think it is one of the most inspiring established habitat gardens that I've come across. She's got a wealth of knowledge of Indigenous plants and animals, and she's learnt a lot in this time through trial and error. So tonight she's going to walk us through the various types of habitat gardens, that you can create in your gardens and what wildlife that you can attract. Kat briefly did mention that we're going to have an extra session potentially after this for 30 minutes for additional questions. So if you do have any questions, we're just going to keep them on hold until Kiara finishes her presentation, but you can also write them in the chat function, or you can raise your hand. We've got a short time for questions after Kiara and then further time later. So now I suppose I'd like to welcome Kiara. You can share your screen if you like, and enlighten us on your passion and enthusiasm for habitat gardens.
Where are we? That's it there. All right, we're good to go. You can all see that?
That's great. Thanks, Kiara.
Excellent. Okay. All right, so we're just quickly to touch on again in regards to what Hannah was saying, and the idea of the native habitats is that we are able to encourage all the animals back to where they came from. So they were all here well before us, and we unfortunately have moved them on because we've taken away some of their environment, but it's very easy to actually bring it back because they don't take long to come back in. I've been here for 20 years, and I think within the first year of planting some trees, I already had native species appearing in my garden. So it's not like they just disappear completely. They just basically give your place a wide berth until something arrives, and then they make their way back as quick as they can. There's new birds and there's new animals appearing in my garden all the time. Just insects. This year I've got new birds again. So it's not ever getting boring. It actually excites me that I'm seeing more and more new species, and as my garden's evolving, it's becoming more fun. We're creating corridors so that I live in Point Cook, sort of central to the Skeleton Creek and also to the wetlands down at the Saltwater Coast Park. So I'm sort of in the middle, and what I've done is created an environment that at least it allows the birds to move from one end to the other without having this massive gap where they can't get access to water, food or rest. So it was important for me to make that corridor available to them so they can get from one place to another and have that break. Aesthetically, it's really quite pleasing to see green and field shade and just see colour, bursts of colour from flowers. So it beats looking at your artificial turf, and it beats having that real barren kind of environment. I had my children involved as I was growing up, and as much as they're mature young adults now, you can't take the nature out of them, so they could quite happily be walking down the street and go, Mum, there's one of those. It's just ingrained now, so I love that my children have continued to have these skills and them knowing about nature as adults. So you can get everybody involved. And I personally find it's quite calming. Had I not had my garden last year through COVID, I think I would have gone crazy. It kept me motivated because I could do stuff out there while I wasn't able to work. So for me, it was my little piece of bush that I could escape to, literally in suburbia. So it has that ability to do that for you as well. I have predominantly used Indigenous plants, as Hannah touched again. The Indigenous plants are suited to our environment right here. So the higher salt content, poor soil in general, it doesn't hold moisture very well. Our rain is very on and off, so we could have months and months of nothing and then heavy rainfall. It tolerates strong winds. So a lot of the Indigenous plants here are bred for that. So majority of my plants are from Newport Lakes as an example, and I know that I've had very few losses in the last 10 years because I've picked stuff that is bred for the area. I barely get weeds. So if I get weeds, it's more so on my nature strip, which is from wandering weeds from neighbours, but in my backyard, I don't have weeds at all. So I don't spend hours and hours every weekend weeding. I don't spend hours and hours watering because all the plants are doing the job keeping the house cool, and the plants, because they can tolerate low water, don't need a lot of watering. The only part of my garden that really gets water is my veggie patch and my native orchids. But the rest of it is pretty much self-sufficient, does its own job. I don't have air conditioning in my home, and the majority of my house is cooled off by the shade produced by the trees in summer. So quite often people do comment noticing it's significantly cooler when they're in my backyard because of the trees, and it just traps in some of that coolness as well. And the soil has improved. So when I first started planting trees 20 years ago in my garden, it was just that horrible clay soil that you get in Point Cook. I now have that beautiful rich soil, and you've got worms and you've got beautiful insects in there. So, and I've not put any stuff into the ground. I never use any gypsum. I've just literally put plants in and let the roots do their jobs. So it's just become this one massive cycle that's just working beautifully. These are some of the animals that have been coming into the area. So the pardalets I've been getting, I have blue-tongued lizards as pets. I've got tree frogs that make their way into the garden. I've had the Nankeen night heron that was last year. I've had a few moths and butterflies, various ones, because I've now started planting in a lot of grasses. I'm trying to do more to attract the butterflies. And then in the top corner, you can see that's my water dragon, who's my pet water dragon. So I have some animals as pets, but they actually live all outdoors as wild animals. They don't live in tanks or in cages. So I get to see them like in a natural environment, and I've actually created a natural environment for them as well. So it looks as real as it can be for them. We also get these in the garden. So I've had all of these in my yard. I've had the geckos. The geckos, I find them in my house, and you will be surprised you'll find them in your garden if you've got a little bit of stuff, a little bit of vegetation will get them there. The little tiny microbats, we often are hearing them this time of year. They're usually flying around under our power lights outside the street, looking for little insects. The flying foxes come in now as well because we've got the eucalyptus flowering through the night. And the flowers actually open up bigger through the night, and their little flying foxes are actually the big pollinators more than bees. Blue-banded bees have finally come into my garden. I only started hearing them over the weekend. So there are delightful little bees, stingless, harmless, beautiful to see in the garden. And then we've got all the insects and the birds. So I'll be touching on all of these so that you work out how to attract all of these into your garden. They will come. All right. So just again, the whole idea is we're trying to re-establish these natural environments so that we can, basically bring back what's been stripped away because of development. And you just have to start working slowly. It does get there. If you start working at it, you'll actually make that difference. And if a few houses join up, and the idea is not just one person doing it, but a few people doing it, you create a lot of these corridors and a lot of these stepping stones, as Hannah was suggesting. So it actually all makes a difference. My street now, it's not just me, but there's a few neighbours that have got involved in these programs. And you can actually now see the benefits because the birds and the reptiles are moving their way up and down. So it's not just one house, they've got options. So this is unfortunately what we're seeing a lot of these days. We're seeing a lot, and it drives me crazy seeing houses with this artificial turf. There's nothing there. It does nothing for soil. It compacts the soil, in fact. And what it also does is tends to create more heat, because the rubber underneath actually heats up. So it's actually a little bit of a disaster for the environment because it's not helping us in any way. And trying to get that soil to recover afterwards is actually really difficult because it becomes so compacted and so dry. So we want to try to become a little bit more natural, start bringing on board stuff. When I first started building stuff around my home, I had nothing. It was a block of land, built a house. We had lots of dirt. First thing I did was laid out a normal real turf. I didn't put down artificial turf, because I needed to stop the dirt coming in the house. And that was pretty much my backyard at that point. Following year, I started to create sections. So I've got reptiles, I've got turtles and lizards. I needed to separate them from where the dogs were. So that was the first priority, to start creating zones in my garden so that I could actually split things up and also do them effectively and also within budget. Just building a house is not a lot of money going around. So we had to be quite realistic about it. That's that section now. So I've got a whole heap of dianellas. There's a gum tree. There's quite a lot of different plants in there. That is a hot spot for blue-banded bees. And that's just really nice and thick. And I allow that to get like that because that's how it looks in nature. So I like my garden to replicate a little bit of what it would look like if you were actually going for a bushwalk. And that's one section. That always stays green. That's always that height. There's no trimming. There's no pruning involved. That's just the way it looks. So it's just beautiful straight out my back door. And that's the next section. That's just a little bit further over. So in there, I've actually got 2 frog bogs, and you wouldn't know that, but they're in there, and it's full of frogs and tadpoles as well. And that just continues through. There's a combination of salt bushes there. There's correas, there's grevilleas, and that little section there that has New Holland honey eaters pretty much every day. As many hours of daylight as there are, the birds are in there, because it produces food for them all year round. So if not one plant's flowering, the other one is, and that allows the birds to have food constantly. That was the further point of my backyard. So again, we just had grass laid out just to keep the dirt down. And that worked well for about a year. Didn't take long for us to put some trees in. That's one section now. So that's another frog bog in there, and it's actually changed from where it is. That was from October 2019. I've actually since pulled out a lot of the saltbush, and I actually replanted with a lot of the native grasses, the pelargoniums, and a few of the chocolate lilies. So it looks a little bit different now, but I'm trying to attract different butterflies, and it's worked within 6 months. So as soon as I put in those new plants and they started flowering, I noticed an immediate change in what kind of insects were coming into the garden. And for some reason, the fairy wrens like that section as well, so they're coming through into that. You can see in the background as well that I've got fruit trees. So it's not just an Indigenous garden. I've got a bit of a mix. I've got a veggie patch, I've got fruit trees, and I've actually allowed to incorporate it into the garden. So it doesn't have to be just one or the other. You can actually have a bit of a blend. So back in the early 2000s, I had young children. I had preschoolers, and I needed to make sure the garden was going to be suitable for them. So initially, we did put in sort of some fun stuff for the kids. So as much as I had some trees already going in and I had the lawn for them, they had some stepping stones, they had some fun stuff to balance on, and they had their playground. And as they got older and they required less and less of the garden, then I started to chop out more and more of it, and then it became what it is now. But you can, again, you can let it slowly just change over time according to the needs and according to what you want out of it. You can see that it's also in sections again. I've got one section along the back there, then there's another section in front of the cubby house. So you can focus on those small areas rather than just try to do it all in one go. Cubby house is still there, just so you know. It's become my garden shed now. No more kids' cubby house, it's mine. Okay, and then we can start creating these gardens no matter how small or big they are. So I highly recommend you start small, and Sancha will focus on this as well. You can't do it all in one go. It's disheartening. It's also very expensive and it's exhausting, and it's just you're going to be overwhelmed before you even start. The best thing is to pick out a section, focus on what you want to put there, get familiar with the sunlight, the rain, what happens in that section, and then start putting it together. And you'll find that you'll gradually join everything up until it all flows cohesively. And that's pretty much how I've done it. This section that you can see now is where I started because I needed to have a spot for my lizards and my turtles pretty quickly as I moved home. And then once that bit started becoming established, it allowed shade for the plants and trees further over. It started to have an effect on the soil, and then I could slowly add in more and more until eventually it all joined up. So that one section's got 2 ponds, and that's where my turtles live. That's where all my animals live. And it's just, yeah, the birds are in there all the time. Yes, I've got native birds coming and going in here, nesting in here as well. I had my daughter build the decking. So I've got little decks that go around in the garden. So I had little boardwalks. So we were off the ground. I taught my daughter at the time, I think she was about 10 years old. I showed her how to use a drop saw. I told her to put on her goggles and a drill and a hammer, and off she went. And I got her to build it. So it was really good hands-on experience for her to actually be able to use tools and actually be able to put together parts of the garden that are still standing. So get the kids involved. All right, and we can create any habitat. So it really depends on what you're after, whether you want colour, whether you want flowers, whether you want texture, whether you're more after grasses, and also what you're trying to attract. Do you want to attract birds? Do you want insects, bees, or do you want all of them? So the thing, you can actually cater to exactly what you're after. So again, Sancha will touch on this, but I just want to highlight again, when you're looking at starting to create your zones that you want to start to landscape, have a look at what you're looking at from your lounge room, where you're sitting down and spending a lot of your time, and look at those windows, and that's the area that you're going to start working on. Don't start working on a garden in a section that you're not ever going to see out of a window, because that defeats the purpose. All my garden is predominantly where my windows are. The areas where I can't see much out of is where my veggie patch is. I don't want to look at my vegetables. I want to see my garden. So focus on the areas that you can see out of on a regular basis, because that's where all the entertainment will happen with the birds. And that's where you want to see those really nice, the colours and the flowers. You want to see it out of your windows. Okay, so that's one section there again. Scaling is really important. You need to make sure that if you are going to put in trees, they need to be up along your fence line so that they're not going to block all the view of closer to your home. We want to bring it down so that we've got our ground covers on closest to the house, followed by like your grasses, then your shrubs, and then your trees along the fence line. You do have to also be conscious that if you've got neighbours, you need to make sure that they're going to be okay with trees on the fence line. They might not appreciate leaves. I'm lucky that I live on a corner, so there's no neighbours to worry about along my entire corner. And that's where I've planted my gum trees. So if there are leaves going over the fence, they're basically mulching my nature strip. I don't have anyone that's going to be concerned about that. So do check about that. You can get dwarf eucalypts these days too. So if you are still interested in eucalypt trees, you can get small ones. They grow maximum 3 meters, so they don't have to become the 40-meter gum trees like I've got. I've got one that's a very big one. We didn't know it was going to get that far. All right. Again, just to stress about the difference between Indigenous and Native. Native means it can be found anywhere in Australia, but Indigenous means it's just within your area, whether it be sort of the saltwater area, whether it be volcanic plains. So we're specifically looking for plants in the volcanic plains area that are going to tolerate the low rainfall, quite strong winds, salty sort of winds as well. And we're looking for stuff that's going to be sustainable in our area. Native plants can be weedy in some areas, so you do have to check if that is a problem as well. Okay, there are some native plants that can become weeds. All right, so we're looking at ways how we could attract birds. I always say, you know, birds are one of my favourites, but then when I get down to the reptiles, I go, well, so are they, and so are insects. I just love them all. But birds definitely do have a bit of a soft spot for them. They're one of the things I really focused on heavily. I wanted to see birds back in the garden. I love watching them. I love hearing them. I love knowing that they're breeding in my garden and that I've created a habitat that makes them feel so safe and secure that they can. So there's not a day that I don't hear screeching from lorikeets or ravens are coming in, tapping stuff on the decking. Recently, I had a collared sparrowhawk that just made its way into my garden last week for the first time. So I just love that I get new birds every year without fail. There's a new species. We need to make sure that we plant trees that have got a bit of height because some birds like to be up higher than others. We need to make sure we've got a little bit of density because we need to protect them from predators, and predators referring to cats, unfortunately. We need to have plants that are going to produce nectar. Most of our birds like nectar. If not, they like insects, which are attracted to the nectar. So we want to have really good flowering plants that are going to supply food for everybody. Water is critical. They need to make sure they've got water because they drink daily, multiple times a day, but more importantly, they bathe daily, and that's their parasite control. So I have water dishes literally just outside my kitchen window where I'm sitting right now, and it is all day. It's like an airport. Okay, so it's all day, birds coming and going. Some of them have select times. The ravens love to come at 9 o'clock in the morning. They have their bath. The rainbow lorikeets like to come at 8:30 in the morning. The daytime is all day New Holland honeyeaters, and then the wattlebirds come in the afternoon. So it's lovely just watching them come through. Sometimes there could be 20 to 30 New Holland honeyeaters having a bath. And it's chaos, but it's beautiful. We need to make sure that also we do try to keep them away from predators. So if you do have cats, we need to try to make sure that they're in their enclosed areas and the birds are free to move and they're safe so that we don't have losses. All right. So grevilleas are one of my favourite flowers. They're not necessarily indigenous. There are some that are, but I do tend to have an abundance of grevilleas that are from all around Australia because they do produce nectar and they're very generous. They produce flowers almost all year round, and birds love coming in for these because there's food. The other thing I also find it loves the grevilleas is the geckos. They come in and lick the flowers at night time. So it's not just the birds, but it's also for the geckos. The eucalypts as well, as I said, you can get dwarf gums now, so they are small, but you can get them in all varieties. You can get dwarf snow gums, you can get your dwarf flowering gums. There's a wonderful nursery down in Mount Evelyn that supplies a lot of these dwarf gums, and they're always coming up with new versions. They have the same size flower, the same bark, the same everything. The tree just doesn't have the same height, so they're little versions of it. And they tend to bring in a lot of the birds and the flying foxes. So gum trees you just can't go wrong with. You need vertical creepers as well. So birds like New Holland honeyeaters and fairy wrens love to nest in a lot of these dense sort of creepers. So I tend to have a few different types. On one side, I've got a native jasmine, and that's generally full of little cup nests where the New Hollands come in one after the other. And the other one is a running postman, and I've grown it up along my fence line, and the little blue fairy wrens love to nest in there. The reason I love that one is because it tends to be a little bit of a magnet for praying mantises. And one of the favourite foods for little blue fairy wrens is praying mantises. So they just basically live in there and they just munch away constantly. It also makes it really hard for predators to get in there. So birds like Indian miners eat chicks. And these guys have learned now that if they can nest in here, the Indian miners can't get to them. So dense shrubbery like this is really quite useful. They're also good for tight spaces. If you don't have much space, you can go vertical. These are great for vertical planting. And there's a little bunch of little babies, which I see them all too often. I just like a continuous now. And I know when I've got a pair coming out with their babies, my dog has to stay inside for a few days. He has no choice. So he knows babies are coming and we just wait for them to fledge. And once we can see that they're flying, he can go back out again. I'm on patrol like a mum the whole time. There's a little picture there about the water dishes again. So you can see I've just got normal your bases from your plant pots. They do need to have a bit of depth so they can wash nicely. They can actually dip in there. But what I've also got in each pot is a rock. They don't like to go in there with nothing to land on. So they tend to like landing on the rock first and then they dive in for a little bath. So you can have a look at a few of these little dishes for the birds. And you'll need to top them up every day, especially during the summer, because they will empty them pretty quickly. So have those in a spot where you can look out of your window because you're guaranteed to see the birds coming in for a wash and a drink. And these are some birds again that I've had in my garden. I've had kingfishers, I've had cuckoos. I've actually had 3 different types of cuckoo. The fairy wrens come every year, and I've even had the silver eyes that come through every so often. So it excites me all the time when I get a new bird. Musk lorikeets I've had as well. Crested pigeons are pretty much, they live here all the time. Grey fantails come and go, and I've got willy wagtails that are permanent residents. So, and they all get on together. They all get on quite well. What they don't like is the foreign birds, so the Indian miners and the starlings. These guys will actually all start to bomb them now. So I don't often get the pest birds coming in because the native birds don't let them come in. They don't give them a chance. So once you start the established native garden, exotic birds don't like native gardens. They prefer open space. You'll find a reduction in the pest birds and you'll find an increase in the actual native birds. All right, so we'll look at frogs. So no doubt there'll be a few of you that are interested in bringing frogs into your garden. This is a tree frog who had been living in my garden. They appear out of nowhere. They come and go. I had this one here that lived for 7 years in my garden in the same spot. Every night he'd sit in one of my bird dishes and he'd eat the bugs that were coming in through the light from the street. I don't go and collect them. They just appear. Okay, I've got more in my front yard. I've got more in my backyard. I hear them croaking all the time and it's just beautiful hearing frogs croaking. For frog bogs, we need to make sure we've got a spot that's not in full sun, otherwise the water will get too warm. They don't like that. So it needs to be partial sun because they also don't like being in the shade. If they're in too much shade, they don't get a little bit of heat in the water, they won't lay eggs. So they need a little bit of sun. Frogs are not good swimmers as much as you think they are. They can swim, but they need to actually land on something. So you need to make sure you've got sticks and logs going into the water so they can come in and out. So this is a frog bog at the top, and the bottom is a pond. There's frogs in both of those. Lots of plant matter in there so the frogs can hide in between. If you are going to look at introducing frogs into your garden or encouraging them to come in, you need to have no pumps or filters. Frogs like still water. They don't want this constant murmuring of a pump or a filter. There's no need to have that in your pond if you're going to get frogs in because your plants will do the job. The plants will act as brilliant filters. So pop some plants in, create your little pockets, pop your logs in, and the frogs will come in and out as they please. Most frogs tend to spend their time out of the pond and around on the ground in the moisture. They'll actually go into the water when they're eating and also when they're breeding. So when you get a big rainfall, that's usually when you start hearing the frogs croaking, and they will start laying their foamy masses in your ponds, and you'll see tadpoles within about 3 or 4 days.
About 6 minutes, Kiara, before we'd like to move to questions.
Oh my God, okay, let me get through here. All right, I did used to originally have the pond liner for my ponds, but I found that with the branches and with sticks, they were just perforating, so they were just useless. So I'm saving you the heartache. Go straight to these kind of shells. So you can get them from Bunnings. You can even use a bathtub, even your clamshell that the kids are no longer using. It just has to be something that will hold a bit of water. The deeper it is, the better, because that will encourage them to lay their eggs. If it's too shallow, they get scared it'll dry out, so they won't lay their eggs. You do have to make sure you're complying with council code, though, in regards to depth. What I've done with a lot of mine is I've actually put a lot of gravel and substrate at the bottom, so I've brought the depth to what's legal, and then I've filled it up with the water, mulch, plants, and water. Okay. Rocks around is really, really important as well. This is where the frogs are actually hiding. So they like to go under the little gaps of rocks where there is a little bit of moisture. Hobblebonks in particular like to actually also bury themselves into the dirt. So once you start laying some rocks around, if you're going to decide to pull it all apart, you have to do it quite gently because you will find that there'll be frogs under there. So around all my ponds, I've actually got a lot of rocks with little pockets. You quite often will find the rocks on the side of the road. People are getting rid of them, or they'll advertise them free on Gumtree or Marketplace. So you can often find them there, go and collect a car full of rocks and start popping them into your garden. And I've got lots of rocks everywhere. And these are the kind of frogs that you'll get. So you'll get pobblebonks, you'll get the brown tree frogs, you've got the spotted marsh frogs, and we've got the striped marsh frogs. So I've got these living in the garden. I haven't had pobblebonk for a while, so I'm hoping I'll get them back again. Spotted marsh are everywhere, and the striped marsh are everywhere as well. And I do have the other type of tree frog, not the southern brown. So we get these in our gardens if we have the established environments for them. They don't require much to get going. I think we tried this last time and you couldn't hear the sound, could you? I'll just try it again. Can you hear that? Are you able to? No, okay, it doesn't work. No, I think I could work out how to get that going. So that's one of my frog bogs. And after it rains, the frogs start going into their noise. So the males are the ones that make the calls. They're calling the girls. And then when it rains, that triggers them to start laying their eggs. So usually after a heavy rain, I start hearing that from my windows. That can go through the night. It can go all day. They're not shy. They don't have a problem if you're outside making noise. They almost compete with it and they try to make more noise. So in that pond there, I've got tadpoles all year round, so that they're constantly breeding in that section, and it's their favourite little spot. Oh, next one. Okay, what am I doing here? Ah, there we are there. Okay, and that's my little tree frog, Mr. Cackles. He's very cute. He's around somewhere, who knows where he is. They're free to come and go. Nothing has to stay here except for my pet turtles, but these guys are free to come and go, and I love that they choose my garden to make that, make that stop. So it's very cool. All right. Did you want to do questions now, or shall I move on to the lizards?
I reckon do the lizards,
Okay.
and then we'll try and get through this list.
Get some questions. All right. So lizards as well, we want to try to attract them back in as well. They're actually good pest controllers. Your blue tongues love eating snails. So snails and cockroaches, they will quite happily just munch away at. So we want to create these corridors for these guys to come through because they're extremely vulnerable to pests. Cats and dogs attack them all the time. People attack them thinking that they're snakes without realising they've got legs. If we do create these corridors from one house to another, we can actually allow them to move from a parkland and through our gardens and into the next section. They're harmless. They don't do anything. They will bite if you pick them up and annoy them. Their job is to just go around and just eat snails and eat bugs. They do also want water, so they do need to have access to something. So some people leave little water dishes on the ground for them to drink, especially on hot days, and they will find that blue tongues are drinking out of them. So this one here is Darren. He's actually my blue tongue. He's my pet. Darren lives outside and has lived outside for 20 years. So he's actually more than 20 years old. He was a grown-up when I got him and still going. So, and he has no signs of aging, which is good. He must be happy. Okay, so if we're trying to encourage reptiles to come, so whether you want them to maybe have them as a pet so that you can learn about them, or whether you want to just encourage them to float through your garden, we need to understand what kind of environment they need. They're thermal powered. So they need actually a bit of sun and warmth to actually get going. If it's cold, they can't move. They're literally frozen. As soon as it starts to get a bit warmer and they warm up, off they go. They need flat rocks to lie on so they can sunbake to actually get their power charging. So it's really important to have big flat slabs of rock with gaps underneath. And that way, when they get too hot, they can go underneath because they're not that great at regulating their temperatures. So if it's too hot, they need to come away from that. I have a lot of wedges under my rocks and I've got a lot of layers so they can choose where they want to go and they can come and go as they please. So they go under logs, under rocks. If they want to get some heat, they come out and sunbake. If they want to disappear, they go under. Hollow logs are really good as well. So they can actually go through the hollow logs and they can stop there and sleep there through the night. So my lizards have plenty of options. And often I find in all these environments, I've also got geckos. So everywhere there's a little tiny wedge or a layer, there's geckos as well. The reptiles love grasses, so they can camouflage quite easily through the grasses and they can get around without being spotted too well. So I have a lot of grasses in the area where my lizards are, and I often find that they'll also pick the berries off my salt bushes. So if you have salt bushes growing as a ground cover in your front yard, that'll also attract the blue tongues because they'll come and eat the little berries. Legless lizards as well really love particular grasses. So you can encourage legless lizards, which are in these areas. You can start doing mass plantings of certain grasses that will bring them on board. And the geckos love to lay their eggs around tussock grasses. So where you've got tussocks, they often lay little communal nests, a little bit like what they show when you watch Jurassic Park, except they've got little eggs that are the size of Tic Tacs. And they often will leave them. They lay them and they leave them, and you'll find little baby geckos will hatch out soon after. So these little native grasses are really important just for, even just for the geckos. You'll also get, again, the moths and the butterflies are very attracted to the grasses. I've got a lot of these where my lizards are because it's a nice way for them to feel protected, as well as through the front yard. Water dishes as well, really important that they get a lot of water, especially when it's hot and when they're shedding their skin. They get very thirsty when they're going to shed their skin. So having some shallow dishes on the ground is enough. They don't need ponds, they just need dishes. So making sure that that water's clean. Some of my lizards, when they shed their skin, they go into the water and they actually will shed their skin in the water, which is disgusting. Nellie loves to do that all the time. So I need to make sure I empty those dishes out so there's clean water in there, not dead skin. And make sure that that water dish is away from where dogs and cats are. So again, somewhere where the cats and dogs aren't waiting for them, potentially predating on them, and it's in a section where they're separated. So little dishes out in your front yard can go a mile for these animals. It can be a lifesaver on these really hot days, especially. Okay, and then the geckos. Again, you're guaranteed you'll get the geckos coming in no time. I often have people say, I don't have them in my garden. It's like, you just haven't looked in the right spot. They will be there. I have geckos in my house. And that's how many I've lost. I don't even keep track. They're literally in my bedroom. I find them in my kitchen. I find them in my laundry. I find them in my front door. So I tend to walk around the night with a torch so I don't step on any or squash them. They often are licking the nectar out of the grevilleas at night time right outside my window when I'm watching TV. So I'm often torn as to watching TV, or do I sit there and watch the gecko out the window? So there's not a night that goes by through the warmer period. In winter, they go a little bit more dormant, but when it's warm, every night, get your torch, go out, guaranteed to find geckos. They love layers. So if you've got layers of bark, so anything that's got bark and texture, that's where your geckos will tend to squish themselves between. At the very front door, I have a little pile of just bits of timber, little logs, and I just leave it there because I initially had geckos appearing under there and I just didn't have the heart to take away their little home. So I've got a little stack of timber sitting outside my front door, and that can be a guaranteed, there's a gecko. I can lift it up and see them. So I am a bit impartial to these little guys. You actually can also hear them sometimes at night squeaking and barking. They make little bark noises when they're having their little territorial fights. But go out with a torch. Do yourselves a favour. If you've got a little bit of vegetation, go out with a torch at night and start looking and you'll find them. They'll be everywhere. Just so you also know, geckos are also impartial to white-tailed spiders, one of their favourite foods. So if you do have white-tailed spiders, you might find that these guys, encouraging them to come into your garden will bring down the population of the white-tailed spiders. They quite like to eat them. I think that was a little video there of this little guy. That was a little baby. That must have only been about a month old. It was literally about 5 centimetres long. And it's just off it goes. And they're not scared. They're so used to seeing me out there with a torch like a crazy lizard lady that they just watch me and they're just gorgeous. All right. There's my Darren. I think that's actually, I finished it. I think we're
done. Well done, Kiara.
That's my Darren. There's off he goes, coming out in his sun. So he loves it. I could sit in my garden all day. I could move from where my lizards are to where my frog bogs are. I just recently built an aviary, so I've now also got birds that I'm entertained by, and it's just, I could just sit out there all day. I do have to work, and I love my work, but when I'm not working, I've got my garden. And it's just, yeah, it's not a job for me doing my garden maintenance. It's my downtime. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Kiara. I feel like that was just as inspiring the second time round, I've got to say. I've just noticed you haven't done insects. So I
realise now I've got my insects, yes.
Yeah. We have 5 minutes left. Do you want to give us the key points on insects?
All right, let me zip through the insects. Okay, let me do that. The insects are actually something that I've become more interested in the last few years, because as I started seeing more blue-banded bees coming in, I thought I need to do more here. And I want to start getting more of the skippers and the little butterflies coming through. And I've seen in 6 months a change just by putting in more of the indigenous grasses. So it was interesting how quickly they started making their way in when I literally just modified the landscape by a tiny bit. I also created a swale in my nature strip. So I actually dug a swale out and I mass planted Themida and other native grasses. So I found even just my nature strip now is attracting a lot of insects that I didn't ever have before. So it definitely can make a difference. These are the butterflies we want to try to get into our gardens. So the Altona skipper butterfly in particular is one that's becoming quite uncommon, but in the more recent years has actually started coming on the rise, because Hobsons Bay have actually gone out of their way to produce these environments with their grasses. They have a particular grass that they're attracted to, and they've actually been doing mass plantings, and interestingly, they've increased. So we're starting to see the difference just by adding in more and more to their environment. The little heliotrope moth as well is beautiful to look at, just striking with those spots. And I'm seeing more of those. The Cape white butterfly, the Cape white butterfly, I've seen these as well in my garden. They're coming through now. These are making more regular appearances. It's not like a, wow, I saw one anymore. It's like a regular. So I like seeing them. And these are, again, some of the other ones that we're trying to encourage. We've got a little golden sun moths. We've got the cobalt wasp. They're beautiful to see. Huge wasps, and they're harmless again. They have a job to do, and I see those in my garden zipping around through the summer. And that's just because of the grasses. So these are some of the new plants that I put in last year. I put the storkbill and the milky beauty heads in that section near one of my frog bogs, and it's transformed that whole section enormously. So it was well worth making that change. Basalt daisies I've started to focus on more as well, and the native bluebells. These are all plants that also, once you put one in, they actually will do a lot of their own propagating. They'll self-seed, they'll continue to seed all right through. It's not like you have to buy lots and lots and lots of them. They're actually very good at producing their own. So you don't, you just start with one small section, let them take over. The native buttercups, again, they're the native ranunculus. They're indigenous. You can get those from Newport. The native bindyweed, and also the bluebells, the blue devils are beautiful. Those, again, you can get those all at Newport Lakes. They are indigenous to our area. We should be seeing these plants everywhere throughout all our parklands, and we don't, because it's just all been developed. So we can bring this all back into our gardens. It's really, really quite nice, and the texture is so different. And then this is how paddocks should look. We should be seeing the little everlastings and the drumsticks. The little tylotus, the pussy tails, those you can also get from Newport. I think they're almost ready to be available to the public, actually, because they were starting to produce some. They're lovely. They will keep growing. Once you put them in the ground, they'll just go forever. So they're very easy to keep moving along. You don't have to keep buying more and more chips. And there's a beautiful little blue-banded bee. So there's no reason to be worried about these bees. They don't have a sting. They don't live in swarms. They don't have hives. They actually live in their little bee hotels. And if you did a bit of a Google on bee hotels, you can see how fun they are to actually construct yourselves. You find that you'll hear them humming. You can actually hear them when they come along into your garden. They have a very distinct hum. They don't sound like a normal European bee. And their blue bottoms are as striking as you see in those pictures. That's the first thing that captures your eye when you hear them, is the blue bottom. So if you want to attract the blue-banded bees into your garden, you want to make sure you've got purple flowering plants in your yard. So they love purple. So dianellas, your kangaroo apple plants. They can even go into sage. They love anything that's purple. So your chocolate lilies as well included, your Wallenbergers is what they want. So think about that as well if you're trying to attract these little rippers. And there's some purple examples. I've got a lot of purple in my garden because I want the blue-banded bees. Austral indigo at the top. The bottom one's the Wallenberger. Then to our bottom right, we have the chocolate lily. So that's not only a purple flower, but it also smells like chocolate. And then above that is the blue devil. So you can also get beautiful scented flowers. And that's an example of a bee hotel. So you can make those yourself. They're so easy to make, and our native bees and native insects like to wedge themselves into these little gaps as opposed to creating hives. So I've got them in my garden. They love them. Okay, There's another little section, just another picture so you can see. So it does look like a little piece of bush when you go into my garden. It's not geometric. It's not a sort of very tidy garden. I actually like my garden to look a little bit wild and a little bit messy. I do trim things up when they need to be, but I do like it to look as natural as it can. So it appeals to some, it doesn't appeal to everybody, but you can make it work to whatever design and style you like. That's it.
Oh, thank you so much, Kiara. That was incredible. And we just made a little decision there to let you roll rather than cutting with questions, because we wanted all that insect information. It's also important. So I think, folks, what we'll do is we'll just continue and move into a brief pause. So we're going to go to Santia next, and then what we'll do is, with those questions, we can either stay after 8:30 and answer them, or you will have lots and lots of opportunities to ask questions in the rest of the program. So we promise we won't let you go without having some answers to them, but it might just not be right now. They're all great questions. So I think we're going to go into the second section with Santia now. As you know, this is a program that's designed with a couple of parts, and the next time that you come back together with us in a workshop format, you're actually going to be presenting a really simple design of your new habitat garden, which might be a couple of pots, it might be part of your nature strip, it might be just a small part of your garden, or you may decide to do a larger area of your garden, whatever works best for you at this time. You won't be presenting to everybody, because that would be very time consuming and probably very intimidating as well. So what we're hoping to do is break you down into small groups based on the size of the space that you're working on, and possibly based on the type of wildlife that you're hoping to attract as well. So you'll be in a group of roughly around 5 other participants, and you'll be able to present your ideas with Santia there, and then she'll be able to give you some feedback. You'll have a chance to ask her maybe 3 or so priority questions, like, what do I do with this tricky spot that's got a water pipe running through it, which I know is a question from Christine, or how do I navigate this area that's under a big ash tree and then has a lot of shade throughout part of the year. So that's where those questions will be well answered. And what we'll do is, at the end of this session, we're going to send you a survey link so that we can kind of sort you into those groups, which is why we haven't given you times for that session yet. So we'll sort that out then. The other thing I just want to mention now before Santia begins is that as a council, we have a subscription to this incredible service called NearMap, which is like satellite photography, but a much, much higher resolution than Google Maps. And we can also get photographs at different times on different days of the year as well. And many people find that instead of trying to measure their site by hand and draw up a map to work on, getting just a high quality overhead photograph of your house is a real shortcut to your design process. So I won't look you up unless you give me permission, but if you would like some high quality satellite photographs of your property, you just need to tick the right box in the survey that we'll send you after this workshop, and I will look those up for you and get them to you on Monday of next week. So that's an optional offer for anyone who would like to take it up. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Santia now, who is our wonderful, experienced, vibrant, inspiring landscape designer who specialises in habitat gardens of the sort that Kiara has just presented to you. And she's also an educator, so she's going to just take you through the process at hopefully a really nice entry level of setting up your habitat garden. So Santia, I'll just invite you to say hello, share your screen, and if you want to add anything else about yourself before you start, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Kat. I've just got my dog in here. I need Kiara to come and help me discipline my dog. But, well, hello, everyone. I'm Santia, and I'm your garden design coach. And today I'm going to help you create a beautiful garden using Indigenous plants. My approach to garden design is holistic. You do not need to have an all-native garden, and I don't want you to pull everything out. There is room for exotic plants, fruit trees and veggies. But to support our local wildlife, we need to shift away from having our gardens and neighbourhoods dominated by non-native plants. So this workshop is all about looking after your own little patch of land and rebuilding nature. And it doesn't matter if you've got a big backyard, a balcony, or you're working on your nature strip. I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful garden that meets your needs and the needs of our local wildlife. Now, I've introduced myself as your coach because I want you to understand that designing a garden is a process. And there are 4 steps that you take to design a garden, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to show you also what not to do, common mistakes we all make, how to plan and prepare your habitat area, and what plants to put in to guarantee success. So there are 3 things I want you to take away today. Number 1 is enjoy yourself. There is no right or wrong way of doing this. Number 2 is gardening is not an event. It's not a weekend of planting and then, ta-da, you have a garden. I think the gardens that I see that are done in a weekend have no soul. Gardening is a journey. It's building a relationship with your little patch of earth and the plants you put in. And like all relationships, things are not always going to go very smoothly, but some days are going to be fantastic. Plants are going to die, they're going to run rampant, but it's just building that relationship. And number 3 is be creative, be bold, and I just want you guys to just have a go and again, just have fun. So as Kat was saying, we have 3 weeks until we meet again. And before we meet for the second workshop, I want you to read the resource pack because it's really, really interesting. And then submit a simple sketch to me and then a couple of 3 or 4 photos of the area that you want to work in. I'm going to look over your ideas before we meet and then I'm going to start off. So I'll have seen your ideas and your design and then I'll start off by giving you my feedback and then you ask me 3 or 4 questions. The second workshop, it's like this sort of crazy speed dating event. We don't have much time and to get the most out of the event, just keep it limited, limit your questions, focus on a few things that you're really struggling with and you'll get the most out of it. So let's go. I'm going to share my screen and share. So the warm up, let's do this, people. Stretching your design muscles and and getting into the zone. So let's change into our active wear. So let's go. You're probably all very familiar with your 5K radius. And now I want you to get out there and walk it again. And this time I want you to take note of what's thriving in gardens, parks, and on the roadside. So these are the plants that are adapted to your soil and your climate. And when you're walking, I also want you to have a look at the styles of gardens that are out there. So there's informal gardens with curved paths and drifts of plants. And this is kind of what Kiara's got. So just drifts of plants, sort of paths that weave through and sort of very sort of beautiful and naturalistic. And then you also have sort of more formal designs. So over here, you've got with the lamandra, you've got sort of repetitive planting in sort of rows and it's a bit more sort of simple and natural, well, not natural, but just very simple. And just remembering that wildlife doesn't mind if plants are sort of laid out in a row or if they're informally placed, they're happy that they're in there. And then also you've got your contemporary planting, which is just really simple palettes and simple palettes of colour and just simple planting as well. So just start thinking about what do you like and what looks good. And you get the best sort of idea of this when you're walking around in your neighbourhood. Now, I do this all the time when I go for a walk. I look at people's gardens and I think about what works, what doesn't, and what I would do to make a garden better. So this is sort of warming up your design muscles. And this is what I want you guys to do. I'm going to show you some photos of gardens in my 5K area and I'll walk you through what I see. So one of the biggest design mistakes is people building a garden less than 1 metre, if they have the space. And I had some feedback with my last workshop that people said, but I've got a really narrow garden bed alongside my driveway. But if you have the space to build a garden bed, the smallest you want it to be is 1 metre. Because why? So you look at here. These guys had space. This is the one with the hedging on the fence. They had space. They could have made it a bit deeper, but at the moment they've just got, you know, a tree that's going to get awfully big, which they're going to end up sort of pruning the you know, the life out of it. It'll just end up with a trunk with these splayed sort of branches on either side, and you've got the little boxes hedged down the bottom. But you just want to. What they could have done, and when I look at this, there was a sort of big tree in the middle of this lawn area, and they could have really made this beautiful void, this beautiful sort of grassed area in a nice shape, which would have been able to, so they would have been able to bring out, you know, plant a shrub in front of the hedge and actually let the plants kind of just, you know, grow to their potential. So try and make your garden beds at least 1 metre wide if you have the opportunity. If you do have a narrow garden bed along your drive or down the side of your house, consider installing a trellis or growing a vine and climber, such as a purple pea coral. And also tall grasses are a great option along a narrow garden bed. And I use grasses a lot when there's an ugly fence or there's just wanting some softening alongside someone's driveway, and they just have some movement. And if you paint your fence sort of a charcoal colour, you know, some of these beautiful plants, they look amazing all year round in front of these, in front of fences. The next photo, okay, this one has 2 things that drive me nuts. There's only 2 plant heights. There's like really, really tall and then really small. And then the grasses are just sort of sitting out there on their own. So when you get the plant list, you're going to sort of know the width and the spread of plants. And you look out in the wild and you see that plants don't exist in isolation. So, and they're just not the same height. So thinking about, if I look at this picture, I think, gosh, get some ground covers in, think about different layers of different heights. They've got sort of really good ideas with this beautiful sort of timber, red gum sleepers, but they could have done so much more. And now's a really good time, if your grasses are looking kind of scrappy, sort of between now and autumn is a really good time, just before it cools down, to just shock them off at the base. And I usually get my dishwashing gloves out, and then you can really pick out all the sort of dead bits of grass and really tidy them up, and you'll get a fresh flush before winter. It's just been this beautiful, crazy weather for grasses at the moment. So so now's a good time to get stuck into some grasses and looking a bit sad and sorry. So the next one, all right, pebbles. Pebbles are not the best mulch. And I know many of you may have inherited pebbles, and really they're just a pain in the ass. And I encounter so many people who just go, what do I do with them? So I recommend just getting small children to put them in buckets and try and sell them on Gumtree, or just or give them away. But pebbles do not help plants grow. They don't give back to the soil. You can't add compost. They raise the soil temperature, and they're really, really hard to plant on. And the second picture, down the track, this will invariably happen. And you can actually see through this the weed matting. So couch grass will eventually get into your pebbles, and all that hard work and expense that you put in will be for naught. Instead of pebbles, use mulch, but in the end, the cheapest and lowest maintenance mulch are plants. Aim to cover your soil with plants, ground covers, wildflowers. Plants will keep the moisture in your soil, and it's habitat friendly. And another thing I was just going to say is, if you are mulching your garden, it's really good to put plants on the side of your paths, so then the birds don't flick the mulch out onto the paths. So just whilst you're growing your plants, it's good to have growing your ground covers to be the mulch, and you've mulched it. It's good to have these little plants in, just to stop you going crazy, always raking the mulch back into the garden. So the next slide, the potted garden. If you're a renter, you have a courtyard or balcony, or if you're like me and just sort of magically accumulate pots, you might have something that looks like this. Now, I want you to ditch all the small pots. Restrain yourself when you go to the nursery. A large pot planted with a tree or shrub and underplanted with smaller plants or trailing ground covers will have more impact than 20 random small pots and plants. Big is better, and especially if you have a small space. So if you're looking online and seeing these little courtyard gardens, the ones that look amazing and have big impact have massive planters. It's like this sort of statement sort of planter. And I've just listed on the side, and if you've got your phone, take a photo, but these are just some really great plants for pots, which are all on the list and all Indigenous to your area. And if you're renting, I just recommend you buy large, lightweight fiberglass pots, because then you can just pick them up and take them with you. And that's kind of the same when you're renting. You sort of, lightweight furniture, lightweight big pots. You just want something that's easy to move, rather than thinking, God, am I going to get this massive terracotta pot out of my backyard? So, and often I think people living with small outdoor spaces think that habitat planting won't have much of an impact, but it does have enormous impact to insects, and also you're providing cover for birds as they move around your neighbourhood, and you are contributing to the green corridors that our wildlife so need. I'm going to show you a couple of beautiful little balcony gardens that I love. The woman, Cassandra Bromfield, she's in New York, and I just love this for its simplicity. She's got an upturned pot just to give a bit of height and a bit of variation of height. And these aren't Indigenous plants to your area, but I love it because it just shows you that it doesn't have to be sort of over the top and fancy. It can be simple and still be beautiful. And this second picture is a designer who I really love. Her work is in Milan, and she does a lot of balcony gardens over there. I think I really wanted to show you this because this idea of big is better and getting trees into pots and create these spaces even if you live in a tiny space. Just remember with planting or sort of putting pots on your balcony, you just want to check the loading. So you want to see how heavy and how big these pots can be before you start sort of piling them in. So just be careful and look that up before you start doing something as magical as this. So that's step one, is what I want you to do: go out for a walk, really look at people's gardens and think about what looks good to you. And that's your warm-up. So step two is I want you to go home, sit down and have a good look at your own garden and figure out where you want to put your habitat garden. So where do you start? And Chiara just sort of succinctly put this: you want to start small. And so I don't mind if you're planting out an existing bed, or if you're creating a habitat garden in pots, or removing some lawn and starting from scratch. Just keep in mind, start small, have success with this program, and don't try and do the whole backyard in one hit. So you also, and Chiara mentioned this as well, but you want to have a space that you look at nearly every day. And it's really, for me, who is a very forgetful waterer, having it near a tap is also ideal. So really, this should be narrowing it down in your head as you sit there going, okay, so small space near a tap, somewhere, I can look out when I'm doing the dishes, or every day when I come home from work, I'll be able to see it. So now that you have worked out where you want to put your habitat garden, now it's time to sketch a base plan. And I'm going to take you through my design process and use a client's house as an example. And remember, I'm communicating with a client, so it needs to be clear and a little fancy, but whatever you do, don't freak out about this drawing part. Just enjoy yourself. My example is our entire backyard. Then I want you to start with a small space, corner of your yard. I'm just going over and over again about being small, but keep it small. And also have in mind that I'm doing a whole backyard, but just work with me on this. So I'm going to show you my base plan. There was another down here. These are also things that here's my base plan. Okay, really simple to do a base plan. I've got myself a measuring tape, and I've measured the fence and the outside of the house, and then I've drawn it. I've also noted where the windows are. So again, Kiara mentioned this. She knows what she's doing. She's created an amazing garden, but it is really important to mark up where your windows are on your base plan, because yes, you do spend a lot of time looking out windows out into your garden. I draw my base plans to scale, but you don't have to. So in a large area like this, 1 centimetre equals 1 metre. Or if I'm drawing a single garden bed or a courtyard, 2 centimetres equals 1 metre. And this is so I know how many plants I will need to fill a space. And if a plant spreads to 1 metre on my plan, I can just draw a circle, a 1 centimetre circle. And just keeping in mind that so many of these plants on your list can be divided, will spread, will sort of naturally just start to sort of populate your backyard. So don't think that you have to cover the entire sort of garden bed that you're doing. But this just helps me understand how many plants I might need if I wanted full coverage of a garden bed. So all I've used here is a tape measure, pencil, a ruler, and a black pen. Now, if you're using near map image, which is brilliant, and use this as your base plan, just grab some baking paper, and this is what I use to do tracing, and trace your home and garden over it with a thick black pen, and just sketch it. And I'll show you a bit later on some of the plans that people on the previous program did, and you'll sort of start to get an idea of, okay, she doesn't want a masterpiece, but and it's just about having a go. All right, so we're up to step 3. So we're halfway there. Let's recap. You know, the small area where you're going to plant your habitat garden, and you've drawn a plan. So the next step is to really, really look at your garden, and this is a site analysis. I'm giving you permission to gaze out your window and sit in your backyard and drink tea and watch the sun sort of go across the sky, or maybe not look at the sun, maybe look at the shadows going across the ground. If it's raining, stop what you're doing and go outside and check which areas are being protected by other plants, or which areas get really boggy after a bit of rain. So I want you to take note of the amount of sun and shade the areas receive. And I want you to check out views. Like, are you looking straight at your neighbour's garage or shed? What are problem areas? What's going on over the fence? A lot of people, when they're designing garden, sort of look down and looking around. In Kiara's photos, you could see these beautifully strategically placed eucalypts, which were blocking out the house, and the 2-story house next to her. So this is called a site analysis. You're really just looking, drinking cups of tea, and giving yourself permission to be out in the garden. I'll show you my site analysis for the for this house. So a site analysis, it's an exercise in thinking about your site. Now you might be sitting there going, let's just get to the design, and it might seem a little over the top, but as I work through a site analysis for a project, I begin to formulate sort of design ideas, and I start to think about where a plant's going to go. I'm thinking about heights of plants. What am I blocking? I start to see the shapes of garden beds. I look at how people use the space, you know, where they walk to, and where the kids use, and where do they like to congregate, and where do they want to access. Really, you don't impose a design on a garden. Designing is about working out the conditions of the site, how people will use, connect, and interact with the space. And it's also how wildlife will use and interact with the space as well. So it's just sort of thinking about what's going on in your space. So the first thing on a site analysis is which way's north, and you can see my little north angle is pointing that way. So that's north. It's a south-facing backyard. So the sun. So you've got morning sun near the kids' bedrooms, and then afternoon sun, sort of that hot, blazing afternoon sun on the western side. And my little yellow sort of smudges is where that sort of full sun hits. When I was talking to the client, she said one of the big issues is that morning sun sort of hitting the kids' bedrooms, and also just be mindful in In summer, the sun's high across the sky, and then in winter, the sun sort of shifts and is lower across the sky, sort of towards the north. So the areas behind I don't know if you can see my little cursor there, but the areas sort of down here will get a bit more shadow than they will in full summer. So having a look, this is what I want you to do. Have a look at the sun. I've also got up top in the corner sort of what, when you look at those labels and they say, all right, this plant's full sun, part shade, full shade. So what does that mean? And I thought I'd just sort of put that up there for you to have a little read on, because sometimes it can get quite confusing. But mind you, I've got a Chinese elm out the front of my house, and it's underplanted with indigenous grasses, and which are all pretty much say full sun on the label, but they're all thriving and growing quite happily. So a lot of plants on the list don't mind you sort of mucking up the rules a bit. There are some that don't like it at all, but that's the joy of it. Just move them around, give them a go, and have fun. Okay, so I'm also looking in my site analysis, things to be kept or removed. There's a dead tree which I've marked with the lines that needs to go. Again, what Chiara was saying, don't cut things up and throw them away. Keep them. They make great habitat for lizards. You can use them as steppers for the kids or a balance beam. They can be a pedestal to put a bird bath on. So reuse, recycle. I've also mapped out good views, which are the green arrows. So that neighbour's trees is being hidden by the tram, but that's a good view. And the poor views, which is a neighbour's house, which is the red arrows. And the circulation patterns, which I sort of touched on before, and also soil types. So this in your site analysis is something that you want to have a little look at as well. And sometimes, when I'm doing this program, there's three things that people always sort of say, I don't know what I'm doing. And that is compacted clay soil. And what else have I got? Compacted clay, getting rid of lawn, and what plants will be bulletproof and help me succeed. So I'm going to just quickly go through these three things. The next slide's a bit text heavy, so you can quickly, if you want, you can run, get a cup of coffee, because this is all in your resource pack. So, and if you want me to just talk you through it, then hang around. But this information, I go into more depth in the resource pack. So if this is sort of relevant to you, have a read. And if not, go for a coffee. Okay. My soil is compacted clay. The first thing I want to say is never add sandy loam. I did a job in Red Hill, which is just sort of stick to your shoe clay, and I went to the local soil supply guy and I said, how do I remediate this? And he said, add sandy loam, and which I did, and it was like concrete. So that was my sort of fail, so which I pass on to you. So never add sandy loam. You want to put in organic matter, horse manure, a little compost, and this will slowly break it down. If you have the sort of a bit of muscle or a bit of anger that you want to get out, grab your mattock and just try and disturb, just try and beat up the soil a bit before adding all this organic matter on. But otherwise, it's just a matter of putting it on and letting it all do its work. And you might have to top it up, but eventually it's going to start to break down. You've got 2 weeks before, you've got a few weeks before you get your plants. So if you are dealing with compacted clay, I'd get out this weekend and just sort of get some compost from your local soil supply and get to it. Do I need gypsum? That's the other question that everyone asks if they've got clay. Not all clay soil needs gypsum, and it's really important not to use gypsum if your soil doesn't need it. And I've got a link to this really good guy who explains it so beautifully in the resource pack. But basically, it's really simple to find out. You just need a clear glass. I'm saying 2, but you just need 1, a clear glass, and dig down about 5 centimetres in your soil and get a little ball of your clay. rub it around. You might need to sort of moisten it a bit, but get it into a little ball, and then just pop it in gently into a cup of water. And the water you want either rainwater or bottled water or distilled water, so it needs to be pretty clean. Then you leave it undisturbed for 24 hours. And if the soil, and then you can tell if you need gypsum or not. So you need gypsum. So there's quite clear down there. Soils do not need gypsum if it hasn't broken up and become cloudy, and soils will benefit from gypsum if all the particles are sort of floating in the water. So it's simple, fun to do, and good fun little science experiment. All I can say is it's such a good thing to start a compost heap, because you then don't have to go out and buy compost. So just compost heaps can be very simple, and a lot of people sort of freak out with them, but I've just got 2 bays which I do nothing to, and I just get soil and good soil. So start a compost heap. Okay, getting rid of lawn. So this is the next one that a lot of people want some information on. And a lot of people are getting rid of their nature strip or wanting to create a new garden bed. So the first step to mowing a lawn, first step to getting rid of your lawn, is to mow it as short as possible. And then you grab your hoe, like this lady here. That's not me, because I broke my hoe trying to do my nature strip. But this is my mattock on the other side, which is my pride and joy and my tool of choice. So grab your hoe or your mattock, and preferably on a warm day, pull up your lawn. And then what I recommend, I think Kat might have said this once, she said just invite a lot of people over. So put on a barbecue, bake a cake. It is a really big job, so more the merrier. And once you've hoed or mattocked up clumps of grass, then you want to get as much topsoil out of the roots as possible, because you don't want to throw all this good stuff into your green bin. You can use a hose. If you've got tank water, use a hose to pressurize it out, stand on it, shake it, but don't throw it away. Just in the vein of keeping it small, just remember that you don't have to do your entire nature strip or get rid of your whole sort of thing of lawn. You can just create a beautiful organic shape in your nature strip or in your lawn, plant it out, and then the next year you can remove a bit more lawn and sort of build it. As your confidence grows, your garden will as well. So don't be afraid to just have a beautiful little circle in your lawn with some grasses or a little patch of wildflowers. And you can just have a spade edge. You don't have to have sort of edging. So again, it doesn't have to be super hard. Now, if you find your grass is super deep rooted or spreading through rhizomes like kikuyu or couch, or if you have compacted soil, you might want to think of solarization as a method. And I've got a little picture. This is a veggie patch, but you sort of get the idea. This is the best time to use this method. Find a week of hot days and sunshine, cut your lawn really short, water it, spread out a sheet of plastic, clear or black, stretch it tight, hold it down the edges, and cook and kill the weeds. I've also seen solarization successfully done with old carpet underlay, which you can go to your local carpet place and just ask if you can have a look in the skip out the back and get some underlay. You just want to remove this once the grass has died, because it can, it's not very natural, so you don't want to, you can just take it back to the skip after you've finished. Black plastic, you can use cardboard. If I was doing my nature strip, I wouldn't use cardboard, because you might find that it just blows off down the end of the street and can cause a hazard. So there's a few methods, but again, wait a week and a bit for all the grass to die, and then you can really just pull it up by the lawn with your hands. And after you've done that, you aerate, moisten your soil. I've included my garden fork technique in the resource folder. Water it well, and again, compost, old manure, organic matter. Now, the last major problem that we encounter are plants dying. So there are plants on this list that are super tough, super adaptable, and will set you up for success. There are other plants that are tough that will struggle if you've just put up all your lawn or you've just started repairing your soil with composts and manures. For example, the chocolate lily is a really tough little plant out in the wild, but it often struggles in gardens if you've just started sort of working the soil. It really needs a sort of a rich, loamy soil to grow. So I'm going to show you my favourite bulletproof plants. And again, this is in your folder, but I'll let you see the pretty pictures and enjoy having a look at them. So these are my favourite plants that if you put them in your garden, they're going to grow and survive, even if you forget to water them sort of, you know, in a couple of days. Because really, once you put these plants in, you want to be keeping the water up every day, unless it rains, for the first month, and then the second month, sort of every second or third day. But these are pretty tough. So cutleaf daisy, Kiara mentioned this. It's, you know, fantastic purple flower. Loves just sort of, it just takes over. Inland pigface, completely bulletproof. If you've got this sort of embankment that nothing grows, the inland pigface would just spread and create this sort of beautiful deep green. Our favourite, the common everlasting, which is just a little ripper, and again, heavy clay, sandy soils, beautiful little white, yellow flowers. Ruby saltbush, beautiful little ground cover, super tough. And the running postman, which is, this is like a brute of a plant. I'd sort of restrict it to areas where you just want full coverage, like if you've just got eucalypts and you just want a ground cover that is going to be bulletproof, but it does run. Or even if you're doing your nature strip and you just want a ground cover rather than, and you don't have much time, and you just want this beautiful indigenous ground cover, this one's a ripper because it'll stay within those confines, and you might just need to prune it every now and then. Native flax, another tough one. Creeping boobiala, and I'll just go to the next one. The Gardenia ovata. So this is on the list, and this is probably the toughest of all plants, and it also comes in a prostrate form, which isn't at Newport Lakes, but if you are just sort of super struggling with an area under, you know, dry shade, nothing grows, this is the plant for you, and it's got these beautiful, you know, shiny little leaves. And then these are all, again, they're on your list, but Happy Wanderer, the purple coral pea, it can be a ground cover, it can be in pots, it's a ripper. So.
Santia, we've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so we're on the home straight, we are. So this was a site analysis. Let's go, this is my concept design for that backyard. I won't go through it too much, but what I've done is worked out which plants are going to work in sort of a boggy area, which trees are going to have a bit of height so they block out the neighbours' fences. Just play with form and shape and heights and texture. You're thinking vertical as well as horizontal, and layer and layer and layer. The more diverse plants you get into your backyard, the more wildlife you'll have. And so I'm going to just skip this one and just go straight to the little wildflower meadow that I did. Again, this is something that's doable. You've got the little water bowls, some steppers, a hollow log, and it's really just sort of ground covers. And this is a little elevation of it. But just what I want you to think of is different shapes and leaf textures. You've got the really sort of fine leaf and the strappy leaves, and the correas that you can sort of shape into balls, and then the sort of mounding ground covers and the lower ground covers. So I just want you to always think of planting, when you're planting, just sort of think in drifts. I very, very rarely buy just one plant. It's always minimum 3, and then I go up by odd numbers, so 3s and 5s, and rarely just one plant, and never 2. Why? Well, I think planting in drifts helps your eye just being led through the garden. And also, I mean, what we're attracted to is just being out in nature. And when you're in nature, the same species are sort of clumped together because for pollination reasons, viable seed, but it just looks right. And that's sort of something that that sort of, I think, is sort of deep within us all, of how we look at gardens and what looks right and what doesn't. But think of planting in sort of threes, never ones. So there's the elevation. Little bird bath. Often people will say, "Oh, Sanchi, I don't want birds in my garden." Not you guys, obviously. I don't want birds in my garden. You know, why would I put a pedestal bird bath in? And often, or because they eat my tomatoes, but often birds are eating tomato crops for the moisture. So I often leave bowls out around my veggie patch, just so that some of the birds have something to nourish them other than my tomatoes. Quick photo, Newport Lakes Nursery, where you're going to go this weekend, and you'll have an absolute ball. And this was a little garden bed that they had, which again, a lot of the plants have a similar sort of leaf texture, like quite fine, which, you know, they could have, you know, changed it up a bit, but I love this colours and the different heights, and this is really what you can achieve with the plants on this list and have a go at. And the one at the back, the Austral Tobacco, is just a ripper plant, bulletproof, has this amazing scent in the evening, and it just attracts moths. And moths are great because of the caterpillars, and the caterpillars are like little sort of sausages for the birds, and will bring more birds into your garden. So we're near the finish line. I want you to walk around your neighbourhood, find time to sit down and observe your garden, have a shot at drawing a base plan. And I've just realised, I'm just going to see, yes, have a shot at drawing a base plan. And these are the plans that the people on the previous program did. So this is what I love. People had a go, got creative and had fun, and I can just see the thought process that went behind these designs. So this was one which was fantastic, and she's got their initial, she's sort of put down what she wants and sort of proposed, and this had given me, seeing this before the workshop, gave me a chance to say, okay, have you tried this, or would you want to get a bit of height here, or, you know, what do you need, just this sort of garden beds in a row? Can we do something a bit more organic? So have a play. This next one's, hang on, go back one. This one was great. Base plan, site analysis, and again, great planting. And this one was a ripper. This lady was renting, and she just wanted this little garden bed outside her window, with some pots, some pots with a bit of height and hanging things, and I just loved what she did. So hopefully these inspire you, and the most important thing is just get your ideas down, take photos. If you feel, 3 to 4 photos, but take photos of the areas. If you don't feel confident drawing, just take photos and get your hose and do some designs of garden beds, and put your wheelie bins to sort of get an idea of heights of plants, and stand inside and look out. Just play with it. But the garden hose is a really good tool for laying out garden beds and sort of walking around them and sort of getting a feel for them. And at the end of the day, just get your plants in, because that's the most important thing. You can always take them out and move them. I'm going to finish up, and I just want to say thank you for all listening, for everyone for listening, and I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to meet in person. On the weekend, you're going to meet a few of your the other people who are on this program when you visit the Newport Lakes Nursery. And in our next session, you're going to see the faces of the people who are also doing this program, who signed up for this program. So I just want you to know that you have just signed up with a bunch of smart, like-minded, good people who want to make a difference, who want to create green corridors and habitat for wildlife. So keep an eye out for each other when you're walking around your neighbourhood, and say hello when you see someone out in your front yard planting some Wallenbergias or out there, and offer to share seed, divisions of plants and cuttings. This is really something that we can all do together. So I'm looking forward to seeing your designs, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Santia. I really enjoyed the way that you take it as a staged approach and step by step for everybody. And you've given us, or what you say, be creative and bold. And I think every time I hear you present, it gives me different tips or tricks. And as I walk around, I know now I do little site analysis of everyone that's around my area. And I say, oh, I might want to put these little elements into my garden. Or when you see some of those images with the different plants, it gives you an idea of which ones to put into your garden. So thank you for that. I'll just stop our recording. One moment.